Ever catch yourself, like, halfway through an article and you realize you haven't actually taken anything in?
Oh, all the time. Happens to the best of us.
Right. It's
Well,
like our brain's just on this weird autopilot.
clearly.
But then, how good are we at even knowing when that's happening, when we're not really getting what we read?
That is a great question.
That's exactly what we're diving into today. It's called metacomprehension.
It's a mouthful, right?
It is, but it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, basically it boils down to being aware of, are you getting this or not?
Right, as you're reading. Not just like, oh, I finished the chapter, better go back.
Exactly. It's like having a little gauge in your head that's like, yep, you're with me, or, uh-oh, you might want to loop back on that last bit.
Instead of just going, I'm a terrible reader. It's a skill.
Totally a skill. And it all kind of starts with this idea of metacognition, which sounds way more complicated.
Yeah, it sounds very jargony.
It's really just, are you thinking about how you're thinking?
Okay, all right, that's manageable.
And so metacomprehension is just applying that to specifically reading.
Gotcha. So how do researchers even measure something like this? You can't just, like, peek into someone's brain while they're reading.
Well, not yet, at least. But there was a really cool study done in Spain
Okay.
where they used a standardized test called the E-Complex-Pre.
E-complex catchy.
Right. Easy to remember. But anyway, they had 823 primary school students take this test.
Wow, that's a lot of kids.
Yeah, big sample size. They were all between the ages of 9 and 11.
Okay, so what were they trying to find out from all those kids taking this test?
The big question was, how well can these students judge their own understanding? And, importantly, how did that change depending on what type of text they were reading? Because, see, this E-Complex-Pre test is clever.
Right.
It's got narratives, like stories.
Sure.
It's got expository texts, which are more like your textbook chapters.
Right, denser stuff.
And then, get this, it's even got what they call discontinuous texts, which is like charts and diagrams and stuff.
So like the kind of stuff we see all the time, not just stuff in a classroom.
Exactly. And this is where their findings get really interesting. They found that students had way better metacomprehension when they were dealing with, you guessed it, narratives.
The stories.
Yep. They were much more accurate at judging if they were actually understanding the story.
See, that's surprising to me. You'd think stories, with all their characters and plot, would be harder to follow than, like, a list of facts.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But here's the thing.
Okay.
It shows how easy it is for us to think we're getting something when we're not. We get tricked.
Tricked by the story.
In a way, yeah. Because stories, they tap into our life experiences, right? They have a predictable structure, a beginning, middle, end. So even if we miss some of the deeper meaning.
The surface level feels good.
Exactly.
Like, oh yeah, I get it. It's about a princess and a dragon. Moving on.
But the expository and discontinuous texts, those require more effort. You constantly have to be making connections, analyzing, and that actually makes you much more aware of when you're lost. So you're less likely to overestimate your understanding.
So with stories, we're kind of lulled into this false confidence.
It's like our brain recognizes the format and goes, oh, safe territory, we got this, even when we don't.
Fascinating. So it's not necessarily that we're bad readers, but maybe just that different texts really do challenge our brains in different ways.
100%.
Yeah.
And it gets even more interesting when we look at how this whole metacomprehension thing develops as we age.
So we breeze through a story thinking we've got it all figured out. But those denser texts, those are the ones that really force us to, like, confront our own comprehension head on. Makes you wonder.
It really does.
How much of this I'm a bad reader thing is really just about the type of text, not some inherent lack of ability.
That is such an important point. And this study, it actually goes even deeper because they looked at how this whole metacomprehension thing develops as we age.
Because, I mean, so far we've been talking about these 823 kids like they're all, tiny adults with fully formed brains.
Right, which they're not.
Definitely not.
And what the researchers found was that the younger students, their metacomprehension, it was much less stable across those different types of texts.
Meaning what, exactly? Less stable how?
So their accuracy in judging if they understood something, it was all over the map, even within that 9 to 11-year-old range.
So some kids were better at recognizing what they didn't know depending on what they were reading, not just their overall reading level.
Exactly. And this variability, it actually connects back to how our brains develop. Because, see, metacognition, that ability to think about our own thinking, it actually matures over time.
It's not just that you're born smart or not.
Not at all. It's about how our brains actually build the capacity for self-monitoring during the learning process. It develops.
So even if a kid is, like, objectively bright, their ability to be like, hold on, I don't get this paragraph. That might be totally different if it's, say, a story about a magical unicorn versus their science textbook explaining photosynthesis.
I love that example because it highlights how their metacognitive toolkit, so to speak, is still under construction.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So what you're saying is be kind to yourself, first of all.
Absolutely. Metacomprehension, it's a skill, and like any skill, it's honed over time.
Yeah.
You're not just born with it.
It's not like you come out of the womb knowing if you understood Shakespeare.
Right. And the second takeaway, particularly for those of you working with kids, is to recognize that they might need different kinds of support depending on the type of text they're wrestling with.
This is making me rethink those times I've tried to help my niece with, like, her history homework, and how those dense paragraphs about ancient Rome, they kind of made more sense when we talked about them like a story unfolding.
Exactly, because you intuitively tapped into how that narrative structure can actually boost comprehension.
It's like tricking your brain into thinking it's just listening to a good yarn.
In a way, yeah. And speaking of how things unfold, this study, it gets even wilder because they use something called DIF analysis.
Okay, DIF analysis. Sounds important, but also a little intimidating.
It's a mouthful for sure.
Can you break it down for us? Like, what even is that?
So basically, it's a way to check if certain questions on a test are unfairly difficult for certain groups of people, even if those groups have similar overall ability. So imagine like a math test,
Okay.
where girls consistently struggle with the geometry questions, but not the algebra questions, even though generally their math skills are the same as the boys.
Interesting.
That might indicate what we call a DIF, which stands for Differential Item Functioning, which is a fancy way of saying.
Something about those geometry questions is tripping them up specifically.
It's like the question itself is biased in some way, even if nobody meant for it to be.
Sneaky question.
Right. And so in this study, the DIF analysis, it revealed that age played a huge role in which e-complex questions trip students up. It wasn't just about their general reading skills, but something about their age seemed to be impacting their ability to handle certain types of questions, even within that small 3-year span they were looking at.
So even subtle differences in how our brains are developing can impact how we comprehend, and those differences might not show up in a simple, like, are you a good reader kind of way.
Exactly. And that's why this whole area of metacomprehension is so crucial, because the more we understand about it, the more effectively we can approach any text, regardless of its format or how old we are.
Okay, so my brain is already going into overdrive here, because now I'm thinking, are there, like, hidden deefs lurking in all the everyday stuff we read?
Ooh, I like where you're going with this.
Like, maybe that super long email I got from my boss this morning, it's not that it was actually confusing, it's that I need to consciously shift my brain into expository text mode to tackle it strategically.
Now that is a brilliant question, because this study, they focused on a specific test, but it makes you wonder, what if we applied this lens of metacomprehension and text type to, like, everything?
Right. News articles, social media posts, even that super dense novel everyone says is a must-read. But I keep getting bogged down in, like, maybe it's not me, it's my metacomprehension, struggling with the way those words are interacting with my brain at this point in my life. Oh, man, this is giving me so much to think about.
And that's what's so exciting. It's like we've uncovered this hidden skill we all have, but like any skill, it takes practice and awareness to really wield it effectively.
So for those of us who are ready to, like, level up our metacomprehension game, what can we actually do besides just patiently waiting for our brains to, magically develop further?
Well, while we can't speed up the biological clock, there are definitely strategies we can use right now to become more aware readers and navigate those tricky texts more effectively.
Okay, I am all ears. Lay those strategies on us. Okay, give us the secrets to metacomprehension mastery. Like, what can we actually do to get better at this?
Well, one of the most powerful things you can do is actually surprisingly simple. It's just slowing down.
Slow down. You mean like read slower?
Exactly. And while you're reading, ask yourself questions.
Not just like at the end of the chapter quiz kind of thing?
No, like during, as you're going.
Okay, like what kinds of questions?
Things like, okay, what's the main point of this paragraph? Or do I actually understand all these words being used?
Right.
Or even, how does this connect to what I already know?
It's like we were talking about before, you're hitting pause on that autopilot brain.
Exactly. You're engaging actively with the material.
Makes sense.
And don't be afraid to reread sections that, like, you just didn't quite get.
Oh, so true. I used to think that meant I was a bad reader.
Not at all. It means you're paying attention to your comprehension. That's metacognitive strength in action.
Okay, I like that. So instead of feeling bad about having to reread, it's like, look at me using my metacognition.
Yes, exactly. Another tactic that can be really helpful is summarizing what you've read.
Summarizing, okay.
You can do it out loud, even if you're just talking to yourself, or jot down a few notes. Because when you try to explain something in your own words,
You realize pretty quickly if you actually get it or not.
right, it forces you to synthesize the information and pinpoint any gaps in your understanding.
So if you can explain it clearly, you're probably at a deeper level than just skimming.
100%. And on the flip side, if you're like, I can't even summarize this, that's a clear sign to go back and revisit those trickier sections.
So to sum up this conversation, what I'm hearing is that we've learned so much.
We have.
Different texts, they challenge our brains in different ways, and our ability to deal with those challenges, it actually develops as we get older,
And most importantly,
that we don't have to just be stuck at whatever level we're at. We can become more aware, more strategic readers.
yes, it's all about harnessing the power of metacomprehension. And like we've been saying, it's a skill. So you can hone it, you can strengthen it with practice and awareness.
So next time I'm like zoning out mid-article.
Like wrestling with a technical manual.
Exactly. It's not panic time. It's just my metacognition sending up a flare. Hey, pay attention here.
Exactly. Ask yourself those probing questions, revisit the tricky parts, and remember, sometimes just knowing what you don't know is that crucial first step to really learning.
I love that. Couldn't have said it better myself. And for our listeners who want to dive even deeper into this whole metacomprehension thing, we've got links to that Spanish study we talked about, plus some other resources over in our show notes.
Happy reading, everyone.
And until next time, keep those brains curious and those metacognitive muscles flexed.